So our next guest has expressed concern that some schools lack the necessary resources to operate when they reopen. Well, because some reopened yesterday. Joining us this morning, Deputy Opposition Spokesperson on Education and Development, Dr. Kenneth Russell, joins us to flesh this out some more. Good to see you. Welcome to Smile.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
From all indications, what are your insights based on yesterday? What have you heard?
Yeah. May I start, though, by first just offering condolences. We lost the principal of Little London, Miss Davis. We also lost a student yesterday en route to school, Trevon Sanchez. So we want to just, offer condolences to the families and hope that this is the worst of it and it's all behind us. Mm-hmm. What we heard yesterday, we heard that 95% of schools reopened. We also heard that things generally, and from what we've seen generally, got off to a good start. We're hoping that that continues for the year. We've also been clear that it is one thing to open, it's another thing to actually be able to function, right? Schools are being creative. I went to schools where they're trying to make do with the teachers they have because they're missing 3 or 4. So you have to make up by shifting the HFLE teacher to teach social studies or the English teacher to teach something else, right? Mm. So the important thing for us, and especially if we're going to deal with the gap in learning, is to ensure that we get off to a start that allows the schools to effectively deliver education. Otherwise, it's not going to serve the intended purpose. Yeah. So schools are still lacking. And when we talk about schools being ready, we're talking about schools having the basic resources. So we want to ensure that each child has a desk, children have access to textbooks, of course, teachers. We want to make sure that classrooms are ready and are conducive. And so even if we try and we use some temporary solutions, we've heard the ministry recommend tents or other spaces, some schools are using churches and so on. Those spaces need to be appropriate. They need to be retrofitted in some cases. It doesn't make sense to have them in a large room and you can't hear each other and, the chaos that ensues when those things.
Dr. Russell, some people would say a lot of those things were prior to burial. Mm-hmm. And that because of the hurricane, funds would therefore have to be rerouted to getting the schools as functional as possible, maybe not 100% functioning, but as functional as possible. How do you respond to something like that? Because they would have had to reroute budgets.
Well, the priority should be given to ensuring that schools are able to function and to address the issues caused by burial. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. But we've also heard that there is no shortage of resources, right? We have heard that because we're doing well economically, we can address these issues. But what we've seen in practicality is that a lot of the schools that would normally, if a school makes a request, I have seen schools that have made requests for for argument's sake, say $6 and they get 2. Right. So, and this is for normal response. This is not a response to burial. This is for the routine work that they would normally do. So yes, some of the issues predated burial. Burial does put stress on the budget and the need to reprioritize. But we're saying, look at where we are in terms of performance, right? We do not have the luxury of, we don't have the luxury of choosing. Actually, we should be leaning into burial and using it as an opportunity to see how we do transformative things in the education sector. That's where we think the emphasis needs to go. Not to see it as, or to use it as an excuse, really, but to ensure that if you think about schools that were leaky, if you think about schools that had problems with their infrastructure, whether it be insufficient classrooms or otherwise, this is the time to be looking at those and to see how do we expand, how do we make them better. Mm-hmm. And especially if you're doing repairs for burial, it makes sense to ensure you do it well so that, you're guaranteeing that you have a stronger institution going forward.
With the report recently about the public health issues being faced by some schools.
Yes.
It was shocking to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, thankfully, it's a number in the minority. How do you respond to that? Water issues, water treatment?
Yeah, and it does underscore. So the case in point is Manchester. I think some 30% of the institutions were found to be... That's where the main issues were. Yes, mm-hmm. And so, look, again, it's not limited to what we saw coming out of Manchester. When you look at Happy Grove, when you look at Buff Bay, these are schools that have traditionally had a fair infrastructure. But now, with Beryl, but also some of the legacy from the previous challenges they've had, they might reopen. Even if they reopen in short order, they still won't be able to function. They'll have some of those issues as well. So it is not, we only have the report from Manchester, but from the anecdotal evidence we have, this is more widespread. The issues on water, though, we know that while it's raining, usually things are okay, but when you get to November, December, early the next term, most schools do not have the capacity to store water beyond a day or two, right? And we're advocating for schools to have the capacity to store up to a week's worth of water and the facilities to ensure that it is treated and not the issues, not to deal with the issues that we saw coming out of that report from Manchester. Because, look, we might think it's simple, but water and sanitation, that has implications, far-reaching implications.
Nothing
right?
simple about it.
Exactly. So
implications for disease and all sorts of other things, right?
And there's also a gender component to that as well. When you think of the issues around sanitation, especially for girls when they're having their menstrual period.
Okay.
What are your recommendations, Doc?
Look, some of it,
Lot to do with.
I want to take my hats, all of them, off to parents, right? Parents matter, and they've been working hard. And by the way, we know that there are some sewing machines and so on that have been humming for the past couple of weeks, because you just get back power and you have 200 things to make. Hats off to the hairdressers and the tailors and all of that. Parents matter because the involvement of parents is one of the best predictors of performance. We want parents who have a strong role. We need to ensure that we have the mechanisms in place for them not just to come to the PTA meeting, but to actually have a meaningful role in the running of the school and in the lives of their children. And so I want to encourage parents not to give up on that. We also need to make sure that, as I said earlier on, coming out of as a part of the response to Beryl, making sure that we're building back better. So schools, if we have a hurricane in the middle of September, what would schools do as it regards power? Schools should have backup systems, solar or other renewable energy-based systems. That's part of what we're advocating for. Of course, the issue of teachers. We have to ensure that we're able to keep teachers here. Remember, the ministry engaged in a discussion with governments to import teachers and has not been able to do that except for long-standing partner, Cuba. While at the same time, we have private entities which have come in and taken our teachers without even alerting us, it seems, as to how many they've taken and in what subject areas. We don't have that basic information. We have to put an end to that. We have to be able to manage this issue as it relates to teachers, and that is going to help us as well with the shortage that we have.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so those things help us to strengthen the system. The issues around resources, part of that we need to see, as we've seen in at least in a couple of the cases coming out of Beryl, really strong private sector engagement, because that again is going to help to bring resources in, but also bring new technology and new relationships that will bode well for the learners who graduate from these institutions.
Public-private is the ideal, eh? All hands on deck.
Yes, they have a critical role to play. Technology, again, that is something that we have to be looking at more carefully. We know time on task matters, meaning the number of hours that children are actually able to sit in a classroom with a teacher getting being taught. But what we're seeing sometimes is that we don't even know how many hours of contact time students are having. Sometimes we don't even know if the students are in school or if the teachers themselves are at school. So technology can play a role in multiple ways, and we have to tap into that. And then we have to get back to assessing for learning, not assessment as learning or assessment for the sake of it. I was saying to someone earlier on this morning that there are not many countries where your grade 6 assessment is a national event, where everybody is debating and everybody is so engaged in what has come from it. And it's not out of interest in education, really. It's about the stress that it's causing and where your child goes to school. We need to get to the point where we're assessing so that we can use that assessment to improve the learning outcomes of the students, and not as a way of placing students in secondary schools. But in order to do that,
paradigm shift there, Doc.
Of course, because right now the problem, is a scarcity issue. If you had all the choice places of schools that you want, right? Think of your favorite school, and or not just your favorite, but the best schools that there are. Imagine we had enough of those spaces to go around.
Yeah.
Right? Then we would focus differently. Our focus would truly be what I think the intent of the PEP is, which is to assess and support the child so that he or she gets better and can then matriculate to the next level of their education.
All right, we have to go. Thank you so much.
Pleasure was mine. Thanks for having me.
Deputy Opposition Spokesperson on Education and Development, Dr. Kenneth Russell.
Coming up next, we're talking about the legendary Louise Bennett Coverley and how we will be celebrating her this year. This girl has that. Who else would? More on Smile after this break.